so it's okay. Welcome everyone. This is week 9. We're currently having a lesson break, so you can focus on the quiz for this week. And after the quiz, we will be going to part 2 of this course, which gets more advanced. So what we're doing today is we're going to look at some of the topics that we not able to share live, like the last class that couldn't hold because of low attendance. So we're going to look at some of the topics, and one of the topic is the pseudo classes and pseudo elements. We need to see how to make use of these classes and elements to style our HTML elements. Now we'll be styling a form. So this was meant to be a form we were supposed to illustrate last week. So I'm going to use the pseudo classes and pseudo elements and some other styles just to refresh our memories from everything we've learned from the part 1 of this course. Now you might see some of the maybe exercise. Some of the styles we're going to use here, or properties, are in your questions from your quiz. So you could always use this as a reference to check for any solution. And also the quiz is from the whole of part 1, and you can always refer back to your class lessons on YouTube, on the school channel on YouTube, to see the previous lessons. All right, so we're going to start already. And here I have a form that we've created for this exercise. Now, if you recall from your form lessons, where we learned how to make use of form labels, inputs, the different type of inputs, and how they are the attributes for the inputs are used. And we are going to make use of the pseudo elements and classes to style this form. Now, this form here is an application form, a job application form. And the form consists, as you can see on the web page, without styling, it consists of full name, emails, password, phone numbers, just credentials that are required for an application for a job. So we're going to make sure that this form looks more presentable and in the right format for visualization. So we're going to start with the basic form styling to make sure that this form does not look the way it is currently, because this is not presentable and would not help the user to understand what or how to enter this form. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to look at the form styling. So we're going to style the form elements which we have here. So from the structure you see here is just a heading using the H2 and the form element using the form tag, and then the labels and inputs inside the form elements. All right, so let's begin. Now, first, we want to make sure that the form is displayed properly. And currently we see that the inputs and labels are all displayed in line, one after the other, on the same line. So I want to make sure that they are displayed in a block format. So each form field will come after the other, below the previous form field, just like we have it in the documents. Now, you need to also understand that form elements are inline elements, so they display inline. That's why they are like this, unlike when we have for lists or tables that displays in block forms. All right, so the first property here is for the form. We want to make sure that the form is displayed, the whole form is displayed in a block format. Now we need to make sure that there is a proper width for the form, so it doesn't stretch from one end to the next of the whole screen page. So to make sure this width is responsive, I'm going to use the max width. So we always use max width for responsive containers, images, and form like this. So I'm going to use a width of 600 px. I will save this so we see the difference. Now the 600 px is currently displayed like this because I reduced the screen. So if I stretch out the screen, we're going to see the width for 600 px, and it's still displaying from the left and not yet centered or have any visible margins. So we're going to work on that. All right, so next we want to make sure that the margin is set to auto, so the form displays at the center of the page. So I'm going to set margin and I'm going to use auto. I'll save this and refresh. Now, even if the screen is this small, with the width we've set here, we still have it centered, so it has equal spaces before and after. So we have our form centered, but still not looking presentable. So I want to have a padding inside the form elements, so there are spaces that pads the content inside the element. So I'm going to use a padding, and I will use 20px to have a more space. So I'll save this, and you can see now this space around 20 is 20px, and it's inside the form elements. So we can add more properties to the form elements to make sure that it looks presentable. So we can add a border, and we don't want the border to be too big. So let's use 1px, and it's going to be solid since we want it visible enough for the user to see where the form starts and ends. And I'm going to add a color. Sorry, please give me a minute. Okay, all right, so we're going to add a color. All right, so now we have a visible border, a border line that tells us where the form starts and ends. But we need to make sure that the form is still in a block format. So we're going to do that after we style the properties for, we use the proper properties for the form. So let's add the border radius to make sure that the form looks a bit stylish. So I'm going to use border radius, and I'll set the border radius to 10px. Not too curvy, just enough to look different. Okay, so we have our border radius, and to make sure the form has a different background from the page, I'm going to add a background color. It's not exactly a white color, so a very light gray color, just so we can tell at least the different areas of the page. So we know that this border and the color with the color background is for the form. So let's look at the styles for the label to make sure that the labels are displayed in a block format. So I could go through this again. So just for reference review purpose, from everything we've learned from the part 1 of this course. So the selector here we use the single selector, and we selected the element form, and it's going to target every content or every element that is holds inside the form element. And the properties we use here is the max width property for we use the max width property for maximum width for responsiveness. We also use the auto margin to center the form horizontally within the container. And then we use padding for spaces inside the form, and also we used border to add a 1px solid border with a light gray color around the form, and also we added the border radius just to give it a round corner at the edge of the border, and also the background color of a very light gray background for the form. So let's look at the label properties. So I'm going to select the label elements, and now recall that what we have here in the label holds the description or just identifies what the user should input in the form field. So when we see the label, we just look at it as what should be entered in, or the information that is required for that form field. So here we have full name, and we also have email and the others. So we want to make sure that they are displayed different from other text, so the user can see that this is an important label or text to tell that this should be given attention to. So here we're going to make sure that the font weight is bold. So I'll set font weight to bold. So remember, we have other properties, other values for this font property, but we want to make sure that this is bold enough. And then we use the display property that we've learned in the course so far. So, but now the display properties is what I mentioned earlier, that some form elements by default displays inline, but the label in the form elements by default displays inline, and some displays in block, but some displays inline. So the label elements in the form element displays inline by default. So we're going to make sure that this change. So we use the block display element. So I'm going to save this so we see how the label now displays. So each label is going to start on a new line displaying in a block format. So this is the block display for our label. So it's no longer displaying inline like it was. Now we also set the font weight to bold, so you can tell the difference now. So when the text is entered, you see the difference between the label and the inputs. Now we can make sure that these forms inputs and labels have clear margin between them, so the user doesn't get confused when entering information. So you can tell if this is for input is for full name, or the next input is for email. So to do that, we're going to make sure that there is always a space. So you can tell from here where needs space. Now there is already a space at the top of this label, but there is no space between the next inputs and the next label. So we want to make sure that there is always a space between the labels and the inputs above. So we are going to target the margin at the top of the labels. So let's set margin top, and we can give it any space value we want. So I'm going to use 10px and save this. So now we see visible spaces, and we can tell which label is for a particular input. All right, so I think this is enough for the labels. Let's go look at the input elements. We have input elements, we have the select elements, because we want to now focus on the next element that goes after the label. So here we have them as inputs, but for the select, that's the where we have to select position. So we use the select elements here. So we're going to style input, style the select, and also we have text area. So we have text area elements. So every element that is attached or binded to a label is what we want to style next, just to make sure that every element has their own unique style. Okay, so now we want to use a type of selector here, and this type of selector is that we are going to select the attributes. We're going to specify the selectors, the elements and their attributes. This way, we'll be able to style each input according to the attributes it holds. So, for example, when I say attributes, we are talking about the attributes that inside the input elements. So we have different type of attributes here. We have the attribute for email, the type attribute for email, the type attribute for password. So you see that they are different, but they all have something in common, which is the input. But in order for us to specifically style any of the inputs, we can specify the attributes that we want to target. We can use the attributes to target the input we want to style. So we call it attribute selector and element selectors as well, combined together. It targets specific types of input elements. So I'm going to do this here, and first inputs. So instead of styling the input directly, which will affect all inputs, this is just to show you that we can choose specific inputs that we want to style. So I'm going to select inputs, and in a pair of curly brace, we specify the type of input. So this first input will be for all inputs that has the text attributes for type. So I'm going to say type equal to, and I'm going to put the value in. So the type will be in quotations. So the first type here will be text. Now, this selector has specified the type, and that's the attribute type, and then the value. So the type of input that we are going to style. So if we apply a style to this selector, it's going to choose just the inputs with the text attributes, and it will ignore the other inputs with the type attribute for maybe email or password and any other attribute we did not specify. So we can also select more than one input. So I'm going to add more inputs here, so we see that it's possible to add any inputs using the attribute selector combined with the inputs name. But what we have to do to select them, like we do select other elements, we use a comma separator to separate them and specify the next input. So I could do this on a straight line, but I want to do this on the next line, so we see all of it in one line. So the next input here would be for, so I'm going to put a type. So the next input will be for email. We have different input type. We have password, tel, date, file. So let's do for all of them. So I'm just going to copy this and just change the input type, since that's what the targets we are after. So we've done for text, we've done for email. So let's include the password. And next, we can do for tel. We have dates and we have file. So remember, these inputs are the attribute type from the inputs that we have here. So I'm just taking each of the type. I've chosen for tel, date, file. So they're they're different type we have in the form. So you could just pick the specific input you want. So we can add color. We have color. Okay, so I think we're just going to choose this, and then let's also add the select elements. Okay, so sorry, it's not with attributes. So we're adding the select elements, and then we want to add text area. So I have successfully selected the inputs with specific attribute type, and the elements select, and so these are other type of inputs, and which we have select and text area. So now we can style these inputs to the desired style we want. Now, since I've selected the inputs and I've selected the text area and select, which is for this, I want to make sure that each input field has each of these input fields has a width, specific width. So we can style the width. I'm going to use a width of 100%. So it depends on the type of form you're creating or designing. So I'm just going to save this first for the width. So we see that the selected input type, I didn't select dates, I didn't select, okay, I selected file, didn't select for radio because I don't need them. Now, you can see the selected input types have the width that have been specified in the CSS property here for file and the text area. Okay, so we can add more styles. Let's add a padding. So when the text is entered, for example, if I am typing a number here, you can see this. The text is taking the whole space in the input field. So let's make sure that it's formatted properly. So we're just going to use the little space of 8px. So I'll save this, refresh. Now, if I type, you see that it has a well-formatted input space around it, and not too close to the margin of the input. All right, now we can as well add unique borders to the input fields. So currently we have a border. By default, input field comes with a border, and now we want to change the default color to a specific color. And we can as well change the size of the border as well. So we use the border property. Or okay, let's add a margin first. Let's make sure that each input has a space. So now this is also a revision to margins, the margin property we've learned so far. Like I said, this class is going to touch almost everything we've learned, every CSS property we've learned so far. So recall that for us to include margins, we can either use the margin top, left, right, bottom, but when we want to use a shorthand, we can look at it as a clockwise format, where we have the first value as maybe 12 o'clock, then we have the 12 o'clock, which is up top, and we have the next one as 3, and that will be for right, the next for 6, and that will be for bottom, and the last for 9, so that will be for the left side of the page. So let's first of all set the one for top. So we want a space of 5 px above every input. So you can see that the input fields and the labels are very close. So recall we had a space of 10 px above each label, but we want something between them as well. So let's add a space of 5 px. So for the right side, we don't need any space on the right side. So it's okay, unless we want to adjust the margin. We want to adjust the width of the input to reduce instead of adding a margin on the right. So I'm going to leave this to 0. And for the bottom, I want to have it as 10 px. So each space between each field would be clearly visible. So the bottom of the input will have a space of 10 px, but the top is just going to have a space of 5 px and nothing on the left or right. So the bottom now would be 10 px, and I'm going to close this here because I think this is enough. So we can see the space of 8 px between the label and the input. That's for top, and 0 for the side because we don't want the space between the side on the sides of the input, and then 10 px for bottom between each label. So this can help us identify each field of this form without confusing which label goes for which inputs. Okay, if there's any question, please feel free to ask. So this is a revision class, so you are free to ask any question, even if it's not on this particular topics that we are having here. Okay, so next we want to look at the style for the button. So we have a button here, and we want to make sure that this button is easily identified as an action button that's without the user reading through. He can see that, okay, this button would do something before maybe something is done, or the data are taken or saved, just any action at all. So we need to make sure that this button is unique because it's currently blending with the form and it's not easily identified. So let's style the button, and the inputs we have for the button is the button elements. Sorry, the elements we have for the button is the button elements. So I'm going to type button here. So just like the input fields that we specified the type of attribute or the attribute type, we have an attribute, a type for submit in the button elements, and that is what we're going to be selecting here. So I'm just going to copy this. Make it first. So type is called submit. And we're going to be styling the button. So this is very important because sometimes you may have several buttons on a page and you don't want to be styling all buttons. Maybe you might want to have a consistent style on all buttons on the page, but if you maybe have a form that you want the button to be different from other buttons, you can use this as well, or you could just use a class or an ID to select that particular button. So we're going to style this button to have a background color. I'm going to save this, refresh the page, and we have the green color for the button. And then we want the text to be different because the contrast is not so nice. So let's make sure that the text color is different. So we use color for the text. And the color we want here is white. So I'm just going to type white here. So I'll save this so we see the difference. Now we have a white color in the green background. And next we can make sure that the text has proper spacing between the margins or the borders of the button, because it doesn't look nice when the text is looking like it's too much in the space. So we're going to use a padding for that. And we can use a little padding space at the top and bottom of 10 px, and you can use, so this is for top, and I don't want to specify for each side, so I just want to just specify for the top and bottom and both sides. So if I do this, I use 10 px here, I want this to be for top and bottom, and I want 20 px to be for the side. So this is going to make sure that no matter the amount of text that is entered in this button, it's always going to have enough space around it at the side as well. All right, so let's take out this default border. It doesn't look nice on the button. So we can set the border to none, and this would make sure that there is no visible border around the button. And then for us to help the user to easily identify this as a clickable button, we could make sure that when the mouse hover around this button, it changes to a particular icon or a mouse icon that tells the user that this is clickable. So you know how you browse through a website and you're about to click the button, and maybe you didn't realize it was a button, but then the cursor changes and your mind tells you, oh, this is clickable. So we use the cursor property for that. And there are several values for the mouse or the cursor properties. So we can use pointer. So pointer is one of the most used for buttons. So I'm going to refresh this, and now when we hover around, you see it gives the pointing icon that says this is clickable, so you can easily click it. So we're going to add more styles to this button, so it helps the user to easily identify that it's clickable as well. So the next properties we're going to look at is the hover pseudo selector. So we're going to look first how to, so this will give us a tip on one of the pseudo topics, but I believe we've seen how to use the hover selector before. So let's just use it here for the button. So I'm going to say button. I'll just copy this. Okay, now I want the background color to display once the mouse hovers around the button. So there are different ways we can do this. When we advance in the course, we're going to see transitions and animations. So you can also use transitions to change the color of any background. So I'm going to refresh this, and the color is not displaying properly. So I'm going to check this one. Oh, okay, so we've not included the hover because I copied and pasted it like this. So I'm going to make sure that the target for this selector is the hover effect of the button. So now you see the difference. So it's still a green color, but a darker color. So this, when the user is hovering around this area, and he can easily find that there is a button here because of the pointer and because of the transition that shows that this is highlighted as a clickable element on the page. Okay, so that's enough for the button. Now let's look at pseudo elements, and we're going to look for one of the labels or attributes that we're going to apply the pseudo elements to. All right, so let's look at another selector. Let's look at how to style before we go down there. Let's look at how to style the placeholder. We can style other elements, other attributes, but we're using the pseudo elements to do this. So we want to style the placeholders. Currently, we have the placeholder attributes in the form inputs, and you can see what the placeholder says. So we've looked at forms in the lesson 8, and we've seen that placeholders can be added to form inputs to help the user understand what is required to be entered, or what should be entered on a particular input. So they just guide the user and also help screen readers as well. So you see here that it requires the user to enter a full name. So let's style this attributes. We're going to use a pseudo element selector for this. So we're going to say inputs first of all, because the placeholder is in the inputs, and pseudo element selector syntax, which is the double colon, and we have different pseudo elements. So let me just type this here. I want for placeholder, and we are going to change the default color from the current gray color it has to something a bit brown, or let's see. And then I want to change the font style to italic. So this might not be the best way to, or the desired design for your forms, but this is just to show you how possible it is to style the different attributes or elements that are displayed on the form or the page. So if I refresh this now, you can see that the text now is in italic, and the color is a bit is lighter and a bit brownish. So this is one pseudo element selector. There are several pseudo element selectors, and we've seen them in the class lesson. So it's up to you how you desire to style the form. You can make use of them in any other form elements or any other HTML elements that you desire to style. So let's look at another pseudo elements. So let's try another pseudo element. We're going to style the label, and we have and we have another pseudo element called after, where we can use this to add a content before or after a particular element. So this now will be for the after. So after the element, we want to add the content, and we do this by using the content CSS property. So this property basically just adds any content we specify inside this as value to any of the elements using it might be for this case where we're using pseudo elements, or it could be a counter. So this basically just adds a content to any element. So here we're going to specify the value in a quote, and let's say I want to make sure that when the user opens these forms, he's going to see that I'm going to put a notice that the form fields or the input fields with asterisk are important. So to make sure that they are asterisks, instead of adding it to all the fields, so I just want to do this from the CSS. So I could just add the asterisk here, and this will make sure that after each label, there is the asterisk character that will tell the user that this form field is important. So I'm going to save this, I refresh, and you can see that it displays after the elements, just as we've used the pseudo element to select it. So you know how you look at forms, and this we could change the color, so you could style this as well, but we're just looking at the possible ways to use these selectors on our HTML elements. So you know how you look at forms and you see these characters that signifies that this is important. So you need to fill this field, else you won't be able to go to the next stage. So if you do not use the required, or you just to make sure that the form validation is strong, you can use this to help the users, to tell them that this field is important and this field must be entered by adding this asterisk sign. Okay, so let's look at the form. We've not styled the inputs type with radio and checkboxes. So let's style those.
Hello? Mr. I think Mr. Redmond.
Yeah, hello.
Yes. Yes, Miss Pascalino?
I think his network is really bad.
In the meeting room, can you admit him? Okay.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Edmund.
Hello, I'm so sorry, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we've been having some technical issues and network as well. Sorry for the interruption. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we can continue. Again, I apologize for the interruption. Okay, so we were trying to style the inputs with the radio type, and we're going to add unique styles to the inputs with radio type. And I want to include the label. So there's something we can do to make sure that we are styling more than or a particular way, or we're selecting elements in a particular order or in a particular way. So we've used pseudo element selectors, and we are going to use pseudo class. We've used pseudo class too. All right, so now we want to use combinators. Remember from the last live class where we used, we looked at combinators, a different type of selectors, child selectors, adjacent, and all that. So we want to try that here, and I'm going to add the label. So I want to use the adjacent selector for this, and recall that to use the adjacent selector, we use the plus sign operator, and we select the elements that we the adjacent elements that we want to have. So I want all labels that are adjacent to the inputs, and then I want to do this for the inputs type with checkbox. So I'm just going to copy this. Okay, I am sorry. I'm so sorry. This keep happening to me today. It's unfortunate. I would continue sharing my screen again. Okay, so we were selecting the inputs with the attribute type radio and checkbox. So I'm going to change this to checkbox. And we want to add unique styles to this selector. So we've successfully used different selectors here. And we want to add a style. I want to make sure that they have their own unique display. So we want to make sure that the display for the inputs with the type for radio is displayed inline, unlike we have for the label and input type for text, tel, email, displaying as block. So we want to make sure that this is displayed inline, and we're going to add other styles to it as well. So first, I want to change the display, and I want to use the inline block. And I'm going to save this, so see what needs to be done. All right, so now we have the label and the inputs. Now, you can see why we use the adjacent selector is because when you look at this label for gender, so I'm going to where do I have my gender? Okay. So when you look at this label for gender, we used the inputs elements, and you recall when we looked at the different combinators, we said the adjacent selectors selects the next element that is just basically adjacent to. So because it's in a block format, we just know that the next element is adjacent to the element we are using. So now we said all inputs with adjacent label selectors. Now this label is next to the inputs. So we also selected the inputs with specific type with radio and checkbox. So now if we had done this without specifying the type of input, we would have had this style applying to all inputs that does not have a specified type. So we only want radio and checkbox. And if you look at the form here, I have the label for this male. Apologies again. I understand this is quite frustrating for everyone. Hopefully the recorded video or the recorded lesson will be adjusted to take out these interruptions. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again and continue. So I was explaining why and how we selected this label and inputs. So from the structure we have here, when we want to use the radio element, we usually have a label that tells the user. So you could do this or maybe style it in another way, but in this format, we have the label first telling that we want the user to understand that the following labels and inputs are for the gender field area. So now we have the proper inputs as a radio and the label next to it that tells the user that this input is for selection male, and then the next input goes with the label that says this input is for the selection for females. So we selected this input with radio and use the adjacent selector that says we want all labels next to input types with radio to have this inline block display. So it doesn't affect other inputs and labels because of the way we selected it. So this is why it's important to understand these combinators, pseudo element selectors, and all the other type of selectors we have in CSS. So we are just going to get done with this. So let me just add margin to the right. So if I refresh this now, we have both of them having proper space. So each of the inputs field with the radio or checkbox and its label now has this margin of 10 px to the right. Then let's see if we add a margin top, if it could have a little more space between the label at the top. So I'm going to select margin top, or maybe we don't need a space, so I'll just use the 0 value to remove all default. So it's close enough. So it's up to you. You can see I am trying out as I go, just to choose, just to see which one looks better. So it's up to you how you want to do it, but these are possible. So I have removed the space between them, which was the default space. So let's look at more styling. We could end it with this. So let's see how to style this checkboxes. So this is just another interesting way to style, to select input types with particular attributes and adding using the pseudo selectors. So I want to say, I want to style the input type with radio. Using the pseudo selector, there is a selector called checked. So this will be when the radio is selected or ticked. Now I want the adjacent elements of all the labels to also have a particular content. So the content will be the tick content when it's selected. So I am going to say I'll put this in a new line. Label. So you can see now we're using Pseudo Elements, Pseudo classes for this, just to see that it's possible to combine all selectors. And we also use combinators for this too. So I want before. Now this is just one selector. I've selected the input with the type for radio, and I've added the Pseudo class to it, which is I want it to have a particular style when it's checked, just like we have for hover. When you hover over a particular element, so that's like a pseudo. That's a pseudo class. So now we've added this for checked when it's checked for radio, and then the adjacent labels next to it should have particular content before them, unlike when we did for after. So this label, remember, are labels that are adjacent to the input. So which is here, what we have here is between the that's this label mil is the label that's adjacent to the input for radio. So now let's also select for checkbox. Now we can style this selectors. We can style all the elements in these selectors. So first we want the content, and I want the sign for when it's checked. I don't have the symbol here. I'm going to look for a symbol to use. Let me see. Okay, let's use a text. Let's use a text for this. I don't have the symbol here. Well, I'm just going to use a text. Let's use look for a symbol. Okay, so let me just try this symbol. Normally, if I want to add a symbol, I would have to go to a library, search for the check symbol, and copy and paste it here if I want to. But it's going to take us too much time. So because of time, I'm just going to do this so we see what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to also make sure that it has a color of green once it's checked. So I'm going to select the value green. I'm going to close it here. So let's use letter G. So I'll save this, refresh, and okay, so there's something wrong with this. Okay, so I didn't close this line, so I'm going to make sure it's closed, refresh. So you see, now if we had the symbol that we usually use for check, so that the check symbol, we would have added it here, but I just used the text G and make sure the color is green. So this is just for example, illustration purpose, but probably we need to use real characters. Maybe we could use the symbol for check or any other proper symbol for when we select something and it tells us that it's good to go or it's selected. Okay, so I'm going to take this because it doesn't look nice. Use the percentage. So we see we can add anything to it. All right, so I'll just leave this like this. Now, let's just look at this last before we end for today. So because of time, we're just going to style the H2 and we are not going to do anything too special here. Just the usual text properties with length. We want to make sure that the text is aligned to the center. The headings aligned to the center. And the color. Something's wrong with my color. Okay, my font size. Okay, so I think this is where we're going to stop for today. So we have each element selected, and we also have the form formatted properly. So we can go on and on with these selectors, using these selectors to style any specific inputs. So this is for the checkbox and this is for the radio. So you can see they display differently compared to the others. So if we want to maybe style this range, this inputs, particular input field, and we want to make sure that this preferred color input area is the width is less. We can also select it just like we did here and just specify that you want the input type for color and you adjust the width according to how you want. So for example, if I say this should be 50 px, it's just going to take 50% of the width of the form. So once you select particular input and you apply the specific property to it, it takes the effect. But you have to make use of these selectors So we used combinators, we used pseudo elements and classes to select these elements. I know it's been a bit frustrating with the on and off network problem. So if there's any questions where you have is there any area you have any confusions, please let me know before we end the class so we can attend to it here. All right, so feel free to reach out to us in the WhatsApp group if you have any challenges. And I wish you all success in your quiz and a lovely weekend ahead. All right, bye everyone.
Bye bye.
All right, bye.